Hello, welcome back to the Masonic Roundtable, a weekly program where Masons from around the world get together to talk about Masonic news and opinions in a friendly and social manner. As a reminder, the thoughts and opinions expressed here are solely the opinions of the participants and do not represent any grand statements or positions. Make sure you keep your conversations open for the public and on the level. To interact with us, we love seeing you live every Thursday night over in Facebook land, YouTube land. The chats are always on fire, and we always love interacting with you, so just be warned, your chats can even show up on the air, which we love. We love bringing those little nuggets of wisdom on. If you can't catch us live, you can always catch us during the replays or on your favorite podcasting app. You know me, my name is John Reork. I'm a past master of the Patriot Lodge number 1957 in Fairfax, Virginia. Next up for his introduction, the one, the only, Jason Richards. Hey, Jason.
Hey, John. How's it going?
Hey, how are you? Good, good.
That is not something we should be sharing quite yet.
Prematurely
Anyway.
shared.
Yes. I was too excited. I hate when that happens. Jason Richards here, past master of Acacia Lodge number 16 in Clifton, Virginia, member of the Colonial Lodge number 1821 in Washington, D.C., and Lafayette Lodge number 79 in Zanesville, Ohio.
Excellent, excellent. Good to have you. And next up for his introduction.
Better to be seen than viewed.
Heyo! Joe, and wait a minute. Am I seeing double? What do we have here?
Oh!
No, you're not seeing double. One of them has hair.
They look identical from here.
Yes. Yes. So, you know me, Robert Johnson, past master of Waukegan Lodge, number 78, and current secretary in perpetuity at Space Nova 1183, and have a little podcast on the side, do all that stuff. And yeah, great to see you. And you are?
Joe Martinez, past master, current worshipful master forever of Manasseh 182. I am a co-host here at the Masonic Roundtable podcast, and I am a Pisces.
Great to meet you.
Cough, not a past master.
Not a past master.
Forever.
Not a past master.
Ever.
What?
Not in Virginia. Nope.
Not in
Yay!
Virginia.
Not until your
Your
successor.
successor has
Has been elected and
installed.
installed.
No.
Yep.
Not even elected.
If
And
you
installed.
die, you're not a past master.
Bingo.
Correct. If I die, I'm not a past master.
That's bullshit.
Oh, this was a good, kid-friendly show we
It
had.
was. It really was.
Once upon a time.
Well, it's good that we have everyone all centrally located here in Virginia. Let's move over to thanking the patrons, because you guys rock our socks. If you want to support the show, head over to patreon.com/the Masonic Roundtable. We love you for that.
Because YouTube monetization tanks every time we say the word shit.
Oh, swear jar. Put a quarter in, Jason.
We'd be billionaires if we had a swear jar. Billionaires.
Yeah, we can start an OnlyFans. Okay, let's head over to the
Only bros.
Only Bros.
Only bros.
It's like a right-wing dating site.
We-
I'm gonna get hate mail for this. All right.
Bros.
Onlybros.com redirects to the Masonic Roundtable.
Yeah, there we go.
quick to Google domains. Let's do the tarot card of the week,
All right.
because we are now in our 5th classical element.
We are, and you know what? Regardless of what you may have seen before, this is a completely random draw from a really interesting new tarot deck, and I've drawn the designers?
What?
Question mark?
No way.
No way. Oh my goodness. What is this deck? Oh, this is the business class tarot.
Nice.
And so if you are a big ol' esoteric and Masonic nerd, and you happen to be very interested in business management, lean practices, and agile acquisition, there's no more perfect tarot deck than this. But just for funsies, I also threw out the Magician in the Kabbalistic Tarot, and then also the Magician in the Trinity Tarot.
Ooh, that's pretty cool.
I
And
love
so,
I like that one.
the Magician. That's really cool, man. I mean, traditionally, you see the magician, like the table there, as you have it on the Kabbalistic tarot. But the focus of what is on the magician's table is not always easily seen. I really like that intuitive sort of representation there. That's really cool. I like that.
Yeah, so the Trinity Tarot is by Ari Weisner. He is the designer of the Transient Light Tarot, which is my favorite deck that we've shared a couple times on the show. And the Kabbalistic Tarot is just very, very well done in general. So when we talk about the quintessential element of Æther, it's really it's a combination. It's kind of a combination of all the elements, but it's also an absence of all the elements, because it just we'll get into this later, but it just is, and it's kind of the void space. And so we thought the magician would be most appropriate as a representation of Æther, because the magician works with everything and nothing at his disposal. He has all of the known, discernible, perceivable universe on his table at his fingerprints to manifest with what he will.
Creation. Love it.
Love it.
I think what could be great about tonight is if we go through this, because Æther itself is one of those things that has changed meanings over time from the 17th, 18th, 19th, and onward and upward into modern physics. You're going to see that it changes what it is kind of supposed to have been, from something containing everything to just a medium, back to containing other things to more of a medium again. So I think the magician is really an appropriate card here.
Good job.
Cool. Thanks for pulling that. Yeah, because it's interesting, right? Because we've had a corresponding suit for the other suits of the tarot, but really the quintessence, really kind of breaks free of all that. And I thought, why not go with the magician who plays with all the elements at once? So
and really exhibits mastery over them all.
I love it.
Right. It's not just he is the one card in the entire deck that represents the ability to hold all four elements in balance and bend them to his will.
Or in the business tarot case, the data, brand, profit, and product.
Yes.
Nice. Love it.
Being a product manager, I love that Wands is represented by the suit of product.
Got to deliver product, baby.
Yep.
Let's do it.
Let's make something out of nothing.
Awesome. Well, cool.
And then all the money goes away, and you're like, poof, where did it go?
Well, we ship so much product.
You know where it went? Into tarot decks.
Yes.
We need more tarot decks.
That's where your money went.
Sales of pumpkins are going crazy during October.
Step 3, profit.
All right, let's get into it. Per special request, Sun Card 19 decided to come early. We're going to cover the fifth element in our classical element series. That is the quintessence, or the classical element of Æther. So tonight, again, we will cover the history, the nuances, because again, RJ did set it up pretty well, that it has changed over time based on scientific understanding and really philosophical understanding as well. So we're going to dive into what does this mysterious fifth element bring to us, and it's not just a cool alien movie, cool sci-fi movie with Bruce Willis. It's actually more than that. So let's go into it. Pumpkin Spice Tarot in October. Ha! Ha! I love it.
Minus
Let's
TMR
do it.
points.
I'm going to give you 1 point for that.
Grody.
All right, Joe, do you want to dive in, or?
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's do it.
The history of it.
History of the quintessence.
We're going to see in the ancient history, as RJ pointed out, it absolutely flip-flops as we go from place to place and culture to culture. But we're going to start with the ancient Egyptians. So the ancient Egyptians had a similar concept to the Æther. but they did not call it such. Oh, that's terrible, sound card.
I love it.
Yeah, they believed in the existence of this invisible force that they called the Ka. And the Ka was that force that animated living beings and objects and animals and things. So it was that spiritual spirit force within the world. And
then you took the Ka and added it to itself, and it became the Kaka, or the number 2.
Okay.
That is a wonderful way to kind of symbolize the idea of the divine emanations, if you will, of man. Number 1 to 2. You've given us a lot to talk about and think about, Jason.
Well, and thinking about 1 to 2, it's almost like 1 is the the prime unifying source, the Æther, and the 2 really, at least according to the cult of Pythagoras, was of course the dyad, but it was the audacity to rip oneself away from the 1. And so the 2, the numeral 2, was largely despised in Pythagorean circles because it was the thing that was so wretched because it chose to separate itself from the all
From the
manifesting,
source.
all-knowing source. Yes.
Wow.
So the 2, the duo, the dookie.
I like it.
So, yeah. So let's get back to the Æther. Yes. So ancient Egypt, earliest examples. But that Æther in ancient Egypt was, again, it was your spiritual double, your vital essence. And it was that essence that left your spiritual body that existed in the afterlife, right? So that's the Egyptians. So now let's go from Egypt, as we always do, into Greece. So this is where you actually see the word Æther actually come into the study of philosophy in pre-Socratic circles. So it was the Greek philosopher Parmenides who proposed that idea of an actual 5th element, not the same as the movie, called Æther, which was different than the other 4 classical elements of earth, air, fire, and water. According to Parmenides, Æther was pure and it was an unchanging substance. It was an ethereal substance, and it was the substance that lived outside of the earth and the moon. So beyond into the cosmos was the Æther, which is really interesting because we're going to talk about that before we get to Einstein. So now let's go a little bit east into ancient India. They also had 5 elements. They had earth, water, fire, and air, and the substance known as the akasha. So it was a little bit different of an element. It wasn't like the others, and it was believed to be the fundamental substance of which all matter was created. The other 4 elements came from the akasha. It was also, we should just rename this episode to Einstein. It was the medium through which sound or light and all forms of energy lived and breathed and propagated through. And then finally, we're going to touch on Persia. No, I'm sorry, second to last, Persia, ancient Persia. So Zoroastrianism. The concept of Æther was also found there as well. But it was a substance that made up divine guardian spirits that connected the mortal world with the spirit world. So it was kind of that bridge between the 2, your 4 grounding elements and then your 1 spiritual element, which I think is really interesting. And they associated this force with the souls of your ancestors and the people that came before you who watched over you and protected you. And then finally, we're going to go to ancient China because they also had 5 elements. The concept of Æther in ancient China was known as the Qi or the Qi, and it was that fundamental life force or energy that, kind of like the Force in Star Wars, that flowed through all living things, between and amongst each other.
Nice.
Absolutely talked about in traditional Chinese medicine, in martial arts, and in ancient Chinese philosophy. But it lived amongst and betwixt us. So, yeah, that's a little high-level history of the Æther. Boom.
Sweet.
A good comment we had here in the YouTube was CWH, who said breath. Because as we were looking at this and we were talking about it, this divine life force, we've talked about it in previous episodes, is like the medium through which life was given, and we talked about God giving the breath of man, or breathing that into man, those kinds of ideas. So it seems to, in the very least, in the ancient world, I guess we can look at it and say that it encompassed the idea of all energy. It is it's almost like when DeGrasse Tyson talks about a receding pocket, right? It's like the idea of the one thing that we ascribe everything to that we don't quite understand just yet. And as we've started to understand things, we pull things out, and the ether becomes, as Joe alluded to, a sort of irrelevant idea, but never really goes away in 20th century, 19th century spiritualism, because it turns into something completely different.
Well, and interestingly that enough, Robert, like for hundreds of years, before the 20th century, like Æther was the explanation for how light travels. And so now you have Æther being, having the connotation of manifestation, combination of all the elements, the breath of life, also the personification or the medium through which divine light moves. And so it's really interesting to look at the symbolism and see the Æther as essentially the paintbrush of the divine.
Yeah, like or kind of the glue that holds everything together, or just the matter in which everything kind of resides, right?
There's a great analogy we can make later when we talk about Masonry, right?
Yeah, that's true. Go ahead and drop it now. Why not?
The cement of brotherly love.
Bingo.
Yeah.
That's where I thought you were going to go with that. Yeah, that's exactly right, because it unites us all, right? And so that's really a parallel to Æther. Joe?
I thought you were going to pull on that. When I mentioned Star Wars, I thought you were going to pull on that like hard.
Hey, I could. Absolutely. I mean, because that's...
because it becomes something different, right? We talk about Æther as being the force, but then, in episode 1, they're like, oh, no, it's midichlorians.
Right, exactly.
Space mitochondria.
But what do midichlorians live in?
That's
the
right.
Æther of the force.
Right. Well, and when we did the Star Wars and Freemasonry episode, right, we talked a little bit about the Force as being maybe analogous to Neoplatonism, right? Having the one that we're all associated with, or panentheism, not pantheism, panentheism, where everything is in the one, right? So
Is all.
Yeah, the one is all. So I mean that's a really good jumping off point, right? Because it takes a different mental model for how these religious and symbolic aspects of Æther came about, right? That they all implied, and again, to find the common thread through all these, they all implied some sort of higher unification, some higher source that everything kind of resides in and is created from. So, that kind of I'll talk a little bit later too about the Adam Kadmon, where in the Jewish sense, right? It's kind of the highest level container for a perfect or divine man, right? That's
Primordial.
Primordial man, right? That right there next to the divine. So I think that's again another analogy there.
Yeah, no, you just hit it on the head, right? So when I don't know if people understand when you say that, we're talking about man before the fall, right? Before he became part of the mortal world, right? Primeval
man in his natural state, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was different than us. It was not the same as us. Didn't have this jazzy hair, and the lovely goatee. Man was different. Primordial man was different than the meat suits that we have now.
Yes.
It was cooler.
Exactly.
Probably
Much
didn't go
cooler.
bald either. Yeah.
Much cooler.
Too many tacos.
So I think it's
They were
interesting.
really good tacos, though.
Great taco.
We do see.
John didn't have any.
I missed it. I missed out. big FOMO. The fifth element actually shows up for the first time in Plato's Timaeus, where he talks about all the other elements, but then kind of alludes to ether by name. But then the rest of it just talks about the four elements, which I think is interesting. So we have it documented as a fifth element, but not much detail about that. And I think that's kind of to its detriment, right? That over the course of the millennia, that it's always been this, like, it's been the Professor and Marianne of the Gilligan's Island, right? It's like, and the rest, and the other element, right? It's not as cool as the main players. So again, that's why we don't have a lot to go on as far as, like, what is ether? What is it exactly?
It's the catch-all.
It's the rest, the rest.
Et-al. E-T-A-L. Taco time!
Taco time!
These are the tacos that John missed. Stuff like that.
I need to be photoshopped in there.
We'll get you. So, I mean, we if we're going to talk about it from a historical perspective, we do need to touch on the rise of science, right? Because everything, if we're talking about Plato and Parmenides, it still has a philosophical slant to it. And, once we get to past the Renaissance and we start to get into the Age of Enlightenment, it becomes to be a mainstay in scientific conversation, right? You get to the 16th, 17th, to 18th centuries, when we're talking about classical physics, post-Newton, right? You start to see ether becoming the medium. Like RJ said, the medium by which everything travels in. Going all the way to Jason's point about when people start to sit down and decide what the hell is light? What is it made out of? Is it a wave? Is it a particle? Sometimes it acts as both. It's so confusing. We don't know, right? So for the longest time, back to Robert's point, ether was the catch-all. It was, we don't understand what is going on here, so we're going to attribute it to the ether. And the ether became a mainstay in scientific talk for at least 300 years, until the rise of the 20th century. It was the common thing to talk about. If you went to Cambridge, or you went to Harvard, or you went to Yale, and you were studying physics, you talked about the ether, because it was a real viable thing for physics and science. Until we start to get to, exactly as Jason pointed out, when people started to actually decide, we need to figure out what light is. Is it a wave or is it a particle? And so for the longest time, people thought that when it took on the properties of a wave, it was because ether was the one doing the waving, right? So light was making ether move in waves, like my hands are doing, like that, throughout space. And that's what you saw, was the rippling of the ether.
Well, and then to bring back to what we were talking about at dinner, the big news in science that came out today, there is a background hum of vibrations that permeates the entire universe.
Well, they always knew that. The magic thing they found was, right, because they discovered gravitational waves with LIGO in 2016, right?
Mm-hmm.
When two black holes decided to punch each other, it made a gravitational wave so profound that you could detect it here on Earth. But the thing that was so amazing about that discovery was that there was a gravitational hum or a noise or a wave that predates the cosmic background radiation. So we're seeing gravity waves in the part of the history of the universe that we can't see.
Yep.
Okay, because the earliest we can see is the cosmic microwave background, right?
Which related, just coincidentally, I read another study this week that they've kind of figured out that space-time actually acts as waves, right? So it's not only curved, but it actually has a flow to it. So there's going to be times where it's stronger and weaker, not just by gravitational pull, but just in the nature of its fabric, which again goes all the way back to this whole like ether concept, because they were trying to find out like what was pulling all this together, right? The Michelson-Morley experiment. Let's talk about that.
Rune, spot on. So that's exactly where we start to destroy the importance of the ether in the conversation of modern physics. So the Michelson-Morley experiment was in the late 1800s, and they tried to measure how the Earth moved through this hypothetical ether by observing how the ether interfered with light waves. But they didn't detect anything significant of any sort. So, yeah, there you go. So they came to the conclusion, Michelson and Morley, that the ether did not exist. But it stuck around for about another 30 years until we get to our favorite, or my favorite, Albert Einstein.
Of which he wrote, if the Michelson-Morley experiment had not brought us into a serious embarrassment, no one would have regarded the relativity theory as a halfway redemption.
That's eating your own dog food, if
About it.
if I do say so myself.
And so this is the death of ether as a
Scientific thing.
sort of thing that had been explored at this point. Beyond this, right? Because the Einstein wrote about ether is not the thing that light has to bounce around on to travel.
Sure. So then it sort of changed after that, right? Because it wasn't necessarily a light medium that was required for light to exist, but also then started to shift towards a dark matter, or like what's the rest of the universe made up of, right? What is the stuff between stuff, the matter between matter in the universe, which then leads you to now the electromagnetic spectrum, right? So there's been a lot of discussion about is ether really now resonating on electromagnetic potential? Does it get into all the stuff that Tesla was doing with Tesla coils and all that kind of stuff? I'm a little on the fence on that, because magnetism itself is a pretty well-known phenomena, right? And it's not yet another element. It's a relationship between current and electromagnetic fields. So
You mean it's a merging of some of the classical elements in the way the magician might manifest?
well, so what is electricity, right? In that
Nobody
sense.
knows.
Is electricity fire? No. Is it plasma? No.
Well, no,
So,
it's definitely plasma. It's not fire.
but what about potential energy? What about voltage, right? That's not necessarily a form of plasma or fire. It is something else entirely. It has properties. It has observable things that you can do with it. And so is that ether, right? Was that the substitute for this thing that we really didn't know how to harness until Benjamin Franklin was throwing keys on kite strings? I don't know.
You've got up until, even in recent times, there's still use of the word ether, in modern physics.
Mm-hmm.
And you see it, you even find it in psychology. So in physics today, you'll see it being used as a term for the quantum vacuum. And so this is a thing that kind of sort of says there's a field of particulate of known and unknown things that has become, that's the quantum vacuum, or a classical sense of an ether.
Mm-hmm.
And psychology is really interesting because there's been papers recently published. I think Purdue University had one not too long ago that talked about, as Joe was mentioning, light, sometimes a wave, sometimes not, dependent upon the viewing, right? The attention, the witnessing of a viewer, right? Observing. So in this sense, the wave that is able to be manipulated is essentially a consciousness wave. So when they talk about consciousness as being a fifth fundamental force, right alongside gravitational, electromagnetic, strong and weak interactions, you've got consciousness possibly, and consciousness could be an ether, because it is the thing that is sort of guiding the idea of what's possible, right?
Well, look at I mean, that kind of dovetails, and we're stepping out of Einstein, right? Because Einstein hated everything quantum, right? He did not like it at all
because it didn't work yet.
right. Well, it didn't sit well with him, right? Like he couldn't mathematically talk about quantum entanglement, right? And that led to 15 years of just debates on it. But when you talk about quantum entanglement, right? Like why can a particle here interact with a particle 100,000 light years away?
And what's connecting them? What is the thing that's connecting them together?
Yep,
That's got to be ether, right? Because there's no other explanation for it.
Ether with an A. Boom.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Which again, now then, just to pull that even further, right? So we went from the failed experiment to potentially, electromagnetic spectrum. Well, then now, even with all the research that we're doing, trying to build up quantum particles, observe those things, building antimatter, like, is that the next evolution of ether, right? Because we're now building antimatter at this point. That certainly wasn't in the realm of possibility 50 years ago.
Well, they did talk about, like leaving all the sci-fi aside.
Right.
Antimatter's shown up, once we started the conversation past nuclear physics, right? When
Mm-hmm.
we built the bomb and then everybody started working in nuclear physics. You did have early concepts about matter and antimatter. Absolutely. Those were around for a while. But I think what you said and what Robert said is super interesting, is that Einstein, 1905, relativity comes out, space and time, you have a vacuum, and you have, it wasn't until almost 10 years later where he was like, oh, gravity, in his special theory of relativity. But it does start to come back in serious consideration when, all the way what you said at the beginning, when we start talking about dark matter and dark energy, right? This force and this matter that makes up most of the matter and energy in the universe, right? Like real matter and real energy account for
Mm-hmm.
less than a fifth of what they think is the mass of the universe.
Correct.
So what's the other 80%? We can't see it. We can't. Maybe it's ether.
It's
Maybe
ether. We've solved it.
That sounds like a bad guy. Dark ether.
Dark Ether. It's going to come out in the next Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Nice.
Yeah.
Kang the Etherer.
Okay.
Kang the Æther.
Wow. Marvel, if you want it, write this man a check.
That's right.
Trademark the Masonic Roundtable 2023. It's ours.
So let's talk about the dodecahedron then. How about that? Because
Big shape.
It's a big shape.
Did you say the double dodecahedron?
No, just a single.
Double do?
Just
No,
a,
the dodecahedron.
Double secret probation.
Double secret probe. That's well, okay.
There we go.
Man, bring up the rainbow shapes. There we
All
go.
right, rainbow shapes. Here we go. Platonic solids ending up now with Æther as the dodecahedron, the 12-sided, 12 faces, 20 points, 30 edge shape. One thing that's kind of interesting, if you think about the 5 elements, when you connect them all together, they create a pentagram, a star shape. And
And
if you
show me.
draw an outline around the star, you get a pentagon. And so the dodecahedron actually uses the pentagon as its faces. So that's kind of a cool corollary there. And so the dodecahedron is the most mysterious of the solids. It is by far the most difficult to construct, using multiple pentagons, requiring a rather elaborate application of Pythagoras' great theorem, which leads Plato to conclude that the dodecahedron is what, quote, the deity employed in tracing the plan of the universe. So this is one of these cosmological shapes, right? That this is something how the universe was created. Which again, have a whole different tangent on the platonic solids and how they actually not only are super cool mystical stuff, but they actually represent how like viruses are shaped, right? And how some early molecules are shaped, right? So I think that's kind of cool that this is the building blocks of the universe, and yet the mystics knew about these shapes and their special purposes just centuries, millennia before modern science. So that's kind of neat.
Yep.
Is there a dodecahedron in Dungeons and Dragons?
There's a 12-sided die. Yeah.
That's an icosahedron though.
There's 20. Yeah, there's a D20. It was the
That's
icosahedron.
That's
Yeah, the blue one. But yeah,
All right, fine.
I guess you could roll 2 hexahedrons, two cubes. I don't know.
Don't get too deep. Don't get too deep. Sun Card's got an awesome question.
This one.
Yeah, I think we got to hit it.
Yeah, I like that one.
The
When
Blue Lodge
does
degree.
it show up in the Freemason degrees? This is a
I've
Masonic
got
podcast.
an idea.
Let's hear it.
Got an
Go for it.
idea. Right up until the point you're brought to light.
Yeah.
Explain.
No.
Say more.
Because there is just darkness and void.
Oh,
And the void is the ether.
The formless
Ooh.
void.
Formless void.
Little Genesis.
Hmm.
There you go. I can dig it.
I can dig it. And the cement.
also the cement.
Also
Also
the
the
cement.
cement.
But let's pull on that thread a little bit because I'm digging this because we were just talking about an hour ago. We were talking about Dan McClellan on TikTok, right? Super big into biblical criticism and exposition. Let's look at Genesis 1, right? The formless void, right? He makes great arguments for Genesis 1 not being creation ex nihilo, right? It's not
Out of nothing. Mm-hmm.
it's not out of nothing, right? And it's always been a mistranslation of Bereshit, right? The first word in Genesis. Totally could be another show.
Yes.
But it's not, we're talking about formless void and the deep. Most people, when they hear that, they get intonations of water or an ocean, right? But it's
Right.
not. It's a void,
It's not. They're not there yet. Exactly.
right? Because we don't have water yet. But formless void, yes, I think you're spot on, Jason.
So if and it makes sense, right? If either is the culmination of the 4 classical elements, then perhaps the word of creation, the initial cosmic vibration, separated the ether into the classical elements, causing creation.
Like a prism. An elemental prism.
Or like a Big Bang.
I like it. Yeah, I like what.
Remind me if I don't do it to go back and edit in a Bram at this point in the presentation.
Oh, Bram.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a thought, right?
I like it.
What if
So-
what if creation was breaking something down into discrete pieces that was already
Well,
there?
It was already infinite potential before the
Right.
Big Bang, right?
Yeah, and that's amazing because we talk about the crystalline structure, right? That is divided down into a 3-dimensional plane of existence.
Mhm.
And so, the emergent theory. There you go. We're
Or
into that.
or enter Kabbalah. You've got the vessel that was shattered.
Right. So let's talk so what does it mean spiritually, right? And we talked about the classical elements before, where spiritualism kind of resides at the wand level or the fire level. But for the quintessence, then you actually have actual unification with the source. So this is where, when you talk about all things from a spiritual quintessence aspect or spiritual element, we are now at the highest level we can possibly attain. We are at either gnosis, or we're at we're right with hanging out with the divine, unifying with the divine, reintegrating with the divine, however you want to say it. Which actually, while we don't have many correspondences as we're walking through things like the Tao or the Zodiac, or the quintessence, we actually do have the 5th level of the soul as we walk through the Jewish 5 levels of the soul. And so the 5th level, the 5th and final level of of the Jewish soul is called Yakida, which represents the most inward journey and divine spark. Kabbalists see this as the level where the divine and soul actually make contact. So this is, boom, you're right there, right, hanging out with the Creator. So this is the unification with the Adam Kadmon. This is sublime, pure, transcendent world. You're really breaking everything off. You're hanging out in the infinite light, and it is an immutable bond to the Holy One. So I think that's a beautiful way to put that. And so, hey, I'd like some of that. I'd like to get there someday. Like that's like the ultimate goal, whether it's spiritual alchemy, right, the great work, or just reintegration, reunification. Just, I think these are all
ending the cycle of transmigration, right?
Yeah.
Like, all right, I'm off the spinning wheel of reincarnation.
Yeah,
I'm
it's
good.
beautiful. We are done. We are completely out of the physical world, and we are there, getting the prize at the end. So, I think that's a beautiful thing when you think of it that way.
Highlander.
Yeah,
like the Highlander movies.
well, you can't count Highlanders Part 2 because that just throws a wrench in the whole thing, right?
That
Being
was-
a prison or whatever.
Yeah. The first and the third. Yeah.
So Scott Hamill with a fantastic thought there. Yes.
Yes,
I love it.
We're done. We're done with our physical ego. We're done with ourselves. We are out now, resonating on a completely different plane.
And that's really interesting. A good friend of mine, Rob Wingeter, great friend of the show, fantastic esotericist, spiritualist kind of guy, knows way too much. He turned me on to a book called I think it's called The Ra Code. It's basically about a channeling that happened in the 1980s that was recorded, and then they transcribed the whole thing. But in it, they talk about an ascension level of beings, and you get to a certain point where you're a grade above what we would call third density human. And you get to a point where you become one with those of a certain vibration, getting closer and closer to vibratory grade, being one with the Creator. But when you move beyond the third grade density, you lose what you might call identity, right? So when you talk about ego death, this is really an interesting concept because it's scary. We like to think we don't have ego because we're sitting here going, oh, please, not me, right? Or you're doing the thing where you get a compliment, you re-compliment, and you really are trying in an earnest attempt to not take in things, to make your mind, you get a big head or whatever. But in the truest sense, ego death is so profound of an activity and maybe even inconceivable.
Yeah, I think it's and your examples of ego are interesting because that's the first thing we think of when we say the word ego. But it's spiritually, it's the death of our individuality, right? And how damn hard is that to forget about being RJ, right? It's like I'm no longer RJ. I am one with all, right? It's
I'm one with the Force, and the Force is with me.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Such a great Star Wars movie.
It really is. There can only be one. Let's look at that Highlander reference again.
If you ever go to South Pasadena Masonic Lodge, they've got a big laser sign that is usually on the wall in the dining room when they have events, and it just says, "All is one." And I love it. It's really cool. I'm like, man, does Grand Lodge know you got that up?
Shh, don't tell anybody.
It's right next to the bumper sticker. It says "Be the change."
Yeah.
Be the change.
Be the change. Love it. Awesome. Well, let's go switch over to the final question, which is the same final question that we've had for the other four, which are, what does the classical element of Æther mean to you? And how are you applying it, if at all? Let's start with our traveling man, RJ.
What does ether mean to me?
I'm going to copy his answer.
What RJ said.
I really think about it as a sort of medium in which I place things in a divine sense. I would probably call it something different if I were writing a scientific paper or something. I really wouldn't. It's kind of like how we've separated astrology and astronomy. Whether or not you agree with why we did that or not, I'm not here to debate that. But just the idea of it's a thing that I hold a sort of magical reverence for, to refer to the unknown. It's a noun that we can use when appropriate. It's a wonderful poetic sense. The word itself is kind of archaic and allows us to be, I don't know, it's somewhat of a profound word, right? Like it means something more profound than just the empty space, or, like what did, the dude who wrote about Cthulhu,
H.P. Lovecraft.
Yeah, Lovecraft, right? When he wrote in the Mad Arab, the creatures and the spaces in between. It's all of that. It's the space in between. It's the magic. It's the thing. And I'm fine with allowing that word to represent those unknowns for me. That's kind of how I use it.
Joe?
Yeah, I'm going to say something different. So, yeah, I know. Shocker. So for me, the ether is it's that we didn't make any movie references, so I'm going to make one now. If we talk about the Fifth Element movie, we have fire, air, earth, water, and what was that fifth element? It was that perfect being, right? So I think for me, we have those four elements, and that ether, that fifth element is soul, right? Is that divine fire within us that hopefully we all have, and that speaks to each other, at that level above the mundane physical world. And that's all I have to say about that.
Sweet. Awesome. Jason?
I'm not going to say what RJ or Joe said. Going back to our musing on creation. Either to me represents the limitless potential of the undiscovered. And so when we talk about either in the context of something we just fundamentally don't understand, that thing can both be everything or it can be nothing. And through scientific discovery, explanation, testing, perturbation, we as humans are able to turn that and manifest that into something that we then understand. But while it is yet unknown, it has the potential to be absolutely anything.
You sound like David Bohm.
Nice.
It's a compliment.
As opposed to Jacob?
As opposed to Niels Bohr.
Okay.
Or Bill Nye.
Sure.
The science guy.
Very cool. Awesome. Well, thank you, Jason. So, for me, there's really the scientific and then there's the philosophic part of it. And for me, I think, again, it's the natural progression of the unexplored, the unknown fabric of our universe. And so, I think it's interesting to see, do we give something a name which you don't know? Do we call it something that we feel there's still areas to explore? So I think that's been an interesting scientific evolution of ether from now we're in this quantum realm, and how do we explain the space between quantum elements, and what is that? And
Ant-Man.
so I don't know. I think that's how I like to think of it from the scientific plane. But again, back to the spiritual plane. It's the end goal. It's the last step of the transformation that we're trying to go through as we're elevating out of a material sense into beyond the spiritual. Right? We are now we're no longer ourselves. Ego is dead. So good call in the chat. And then just reunifying with the divine. Something that we won't ever get to while we're alive, but it's certainly the last stop on the bus stop. So I don't know. It's something to look forward to, and I think that's a good way to always be striving to get a little bit closer to reunifying with the divine. So that's the goal. That's what it's all about, and hence why we care. There can be only one reference here. Okay, let's go to thanking all of you because you guys rock. Thank you all very much for watching, and we'll see you next week. And keep searching for more light. Have a good night.